poor mother of twins tries to buy Christmas dinner with $20. But the billionaire's son sees everything and asks for the unbelievable. Snow was falling gently over Pine Hill, covering the streets with a thin white blanket. It was Christmas Eve, and the whole town seemed to shimmer with colored lights and garlands hanging in the shop windows. Grace pushed open the grocery store door and felt the warmth of the environment envelop her. In her right hand, she held $20 carefully folded, all the money she had to buy Christmas dinner. They were her last savings of the week, put aside cent by cent after paying the overdue rent and the electric and water bills. $20 for an entire dinner, for 3 people. Her twin daughters, Sophie and Maddie, walked in right behind her. Their blonde hair fell over their shoulders, and their blue eyes sparkled with wonder at the Christmas decorations. "Mommy, look!" Sophie pointed to the golden ornaments hanging from the ceiling. "Everything shines." "How beautiful," Maddie whispered, stopping in the middle of the entrance to admire the red ribbons and silver stars that danced under the fluorescent lights. Grace smiled, despite feeling the crushing weight in her chest. The girls were only 5 years old, and to them that decorated grocery store was pure magic. She didn't want to spoil this moment with adult worries. "Come on, girls, we need to be fast." Grace grabbed a small basket and began walking through the aisles. She knew exactly what she needed to buy. No superfluities, no luxuries, just the essentials to survive: rice, beans, a few eggs, a loaf of bread, maybe some butter if there was money left over. Every penny was counted 3 times before being spent. Sophie and Maddie followed close by her side, observing everything around them with that childlike curiosity that missed no detail. They saw other families pushing huge carts, overflowing with packages of cookies, sodas, colorful fruits, boxes of chocolate, and candy wrapped in shiny paper. "Mommy, are we going to buy chocolate?" Sophie asked, looking at a shelf full of milk chocolate bars. Grace stopped and bent down to be at her daughter's height. She stroked Sophie's soft blonde hair, trying not to let the sadness show in her voice. "Not today, sweetie, but maybe next year, right? When Mommy can get a better job?" Sophie nodded, but Grace saw the disappointment in her blue eyes. That hurt more than any hunger, more than any cold. Seeing her daughters desire simple things she couldn't give them was a silent torture. They continued through the store. Grace put the items into the basket with extreme care, mentally calculating the price of each product. A bag of rice, $3.50. Beans, $2.90. Eggs, $4. Bread, $2.20. Butter, $3. $15.60 so far. There was still room to buy something else. Maybe a juice for the girls. Maybe a can of corn to make a simple salad. Grace took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She was good with numbers. She had to be. Surviving on so little required constant mathematical skill. Then they turned the corner and passed the frozen food section, and there were the Christmas turkeys, large, imposing, with golden and succulent photos printed on the packaging. Whole turkeys, ready to be roasted and served on tables filled with laughter, hugs, and family love. Grace quickly looked away, feeling a lump in her throat. She tried to pull the girls into the next aisle, pretending she hadn't seen anything. But Maddie stopped. She stood completely still in front of the freezer, staring at the frozen turkeys with those clear eyes full of innocence and hope. Then she slowly turned to Grace, and her voice came out low, almost ashamed. "Mommy, aren't we going to buy the turkey?" Grace felt her heart violently tighten, as if someone had plunged a knife right into the center of her chest and twisted it. She quickly bent down, holding Maddie's small hands gently. "We don't have the money, darling." The words came out painfully, laden with a shame Grace tried to hide. She hated having to say that. She hated not being able to give her daughters what other children had. She hated feeling like she was failing as a mother. Maddie lowered her head and didn't say anything else. Sophie also remained silent beside her sister, holding her hand tightly. Grace blinked quickly, trying to hold back the tears that were starting to burn her eyes. She couldn't cry here, not in front of the girls. She had to be strong. "Come on, girls. Let's hurry up and pay and go home." But what Grace didn't know was that someone had seen everything. Across the aisle, half hidden between the tall shelves of juices and sodas, a 6-year-old boy named Caleb watched the entire scene. He had messy brown hair, healthy, pink cheeks, and curious eyes that missed no detail. Caleb saw the sadness stamped on the faces of the two blonde girls. He saw their mother try to hide her pain, lowering her head as she held her daughter's hands, and that deeply affected him in a way he couldn't explain with words. He felt his chest tighten. He felt a strong urge to do something. Without thinking twice, Caleb strongly tugged on the sleeve of his father's black leather jacket. "Dad?" Aaron was distracted, looking at the shopping list on his phone while pushing the cart full of products. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a well-kept beard and a serious demeanor that commanded respect. But beneath that firm exterior, he hid a huge heart. "What is it, son?" "Those girls over there." Caleb pointed discreetly to Grace and the twins, who were now walking slowly toward the checkout, with the basket almost empty in their hands. "They wanted to buy a turkey, but they don't have any money." Aaron looked up from his phone and followed his son's gaze. He saw the woman with brown hair pulled back in a simple, worn ponytail. He saw the coat that was too thin to withstand the biting December cold. He saw the two blonde little girls beside her, holding hands, walking with small, silent steps. He saw the sadness. He saw the struggle. He saw the dignity of someone trying to survive without losing hope. "Dad!" Caleb pulled his sleeve again, even harder, almost desperate. His eyes shone with a pure and genuine compassion. "Can we help them?" Aaron looked at his son. Caleb had that kind of kindness that came straight from the soul, without filters, without ulterior motives. There was no malice, no judgment, just a sincere desire to do good, and that touched Aaron deeply. He remained silent for a few seconds, watching the woman and her daughters disappear into the next aisle. Then he made a decision. "Wait here, son. Don't leave this spot." Aaron quickly walked to the turkey freezer and grabbed one of the biggest ones he could find. It was a large turkey, enough for a whole family. Without thinking twice, he put it in the cart and went straight to the express checkout. He paid in less than 3 minutes, picked up the heavy bag with the turkey inside, and left the store. Caleb ran after him, confused but excited. "Dad, what are you going to do?" "You'll see." Outside, the snow continued to fall softly. Grace was on the sidewalk, helping the girls put on their worn wool gloves when Aaron approached. He held the bag with the turkey and hesitated for a second. He didn't want to seem arrogant. He didn't want Grace to feel humiliated. But his son's look and the sadness of those children were stronger than any hesitation. "Excuse me?" Grace turned and came face to face with a tall, elegant man with kind eyes, holding a grocery bag. "Yes?" She frowned, confused. She didn't know him. Aaron held out the bag to her, with a gentle smile on his face. I saw you inside, and my son saw you too. We wanted to give this to you." Grace looked at the bag and saw the unmistakable outline of a frozen turkey. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, shaking her head. "What? No, I can't accept this." "Please," Aaron insisted, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "It's Christmas. We just want to wish you a Merry Christmas. No ulterior motives." "No expecting anything in return." Grace shook her head again, feeling the tears return full force. "I don't know you. I can't accept charity from strangers. Mommy, accept it?" Maddie pulled on the hem of her coat with childlike desperation. "Please, we wanted a turkey so much." Sophie also grabbed her mother's arm, her blue eyes shining with hope. "Please, Mommy." Grace took a deep breath, feeling the world spin around. She didn't want charity. She didn't want to be seen as someone worthy of pity, but at the same time, she saw the pure joy on her daughters' faces, and she saw the absolute sincerity in the eyes of that man and his son. There was no judgment there, only kindness. "Thank you," she finally whispered, taking the heavy bag with trembling hands. "Thank you very, very much. You have no idea what this means." Aaron smiled, and for the first time, Grace saw how truly kind he seemed. "Merry Christmas." Caleb stepped forward, timidly waving at the twins. "Hi." Sophie and Maddie waved back, with huge, yet shy, smiles. Then Aaron put his hand on his son's shoulder, and the two turned to walk back to their car. Grace stood there, holding the bag as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. The girls were jumping around her, laughing for the first time in days. "We're going to have turkey, Mommy. We're going to have real turkey." Grace looked back and saw Aaron and Caleb getting into an elegant, dark car. He looked at her one last time before leaving, and Grace waved slightly, still unable to believe what had just happened. Something had changed in that moment. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it with absolute clarity. Their destinies had intertwined there, in the snow of Pine Hills on Christmas Eve. Grace's house was small, very small. 2 cramped bedrooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen, and a bathroom that constantly had plumbing problems. The walls had peeling paint, and the heater made more noise than heat. But that night, the house was full of life. Grace put the turkey in the oven with all the care in the world. She seasoned it with what she had: salt, pepper, a little garlic, and dried herbs she had saved for months. Nothing sophisticated, but made with love and gratitude. While the turkey was roasting, filling the house with a delicious aroma, Sophie and Maddie spread colorful napkins on the old table. They had made the napkins at school, coloring them with crayons and gluing glitter to the edges. They were crooked, stained, and imperfect, but they were beautiful. "Look, Mommy, is it pretty?" Sophie held up a pink napkin with golden stars drawn on it. "It's perfect, my love." Grace smiled, her eyes teary with emotion. She looked around. The table was old, the chairs were rickety, and the house was cold. But right there, in that moment, everything felt right. The turkey was finally ready, golden and succulent. Grace carefully placed it in the center of the table. The girls clapped their hands, completely ecstatic. "It's the most beautiful turkey in the world," Maddie shouted, jumping for joy. Grace sat down with her daughters, and they began to eat. The turkey was perfect, and the girls ate as if it were the best food they had ever tasted. Midway through dinner, Maddie stopped eating and looked at Grace with a thoughtful expression. "Mommy, I liked the boy." Grace looked up, surprised. Which boy, dear?" "The one who was with the man at the store." Maddie bit her lip. "He seemed really nice. I wish I could see him again." Sophie immediately agreed, nodding enthusiastically. "Yeah, he was good, and his dad was too." Grace smiled, feeling her heart warm in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. Or who knows, maybe we'll run into them again. She didn't know if that would really happen. Pine Hill wasn't a huge city, but it wasn't tiny either. The chances of crossing paths with that man and his son again were minimal. But Grace had hope. For the first time in a long time, she had real hope. The 3 of them finished dinner and cleaned the table together, laughing and chatting. Afterward, Grace tucked the girls into bed, covering them with their thin blankets. They fell asleep quickly, with content smiles on their faces. Grace returned to the living room and looked at the empty table. The turkey was gone, the colorful napkins were crumpled, and the house returned to silence. But something had changed. That humble Christmas had been a miracle, and Grace felt, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The alarm clock rang at 5:30 in the morning. Grace slowly opened her eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion throughout her body. The house was freezing, and she pulled the thin blanket up to her chin before finally getting up. Another day, another battle. Christmas had passed. The magic had only lasted a few hours, and now reality was knocking hard on the door. Grace went to the kitchen and made a weak coffee, using the grounds that were already at the bottom of the can. While waiting for the water to boil, she looked out the window. The snow still covered the streets of Pine Hill, but now it looked less beautiful. It just looked cold and inconvenient. She picked up the cup of coffee and sat at the table, opening the old notebook she used to track her finances. Pages and pages filled with numbers, bills, and debts written in shaky handwriting. Grace sighed and began calculating again, as she did every single day. Rent, $450, 2 weeks overdue. Electricity, $83. 5 days past due. Water, $42. Still had another week to wait. Food, whatever was left. Grace bit her lip, feeling the familiar knot tighten in her throat. She had earned $220 working at the hotel as a housekeeper last week. It wasn't enough, it was never enough, and now there was something worse. On Friday, the hotel manager had called Grace into the office. The conversation was quick and direct. The hotel was seeing fewer guests after the holidays, so they needed to cut some employees' hours. Grace was one of those chosen. Her weekly hours dropped from 40 to 25, almost half her salary, cut all at once. Grace had left that office with shaky legs, feeling the world collapsing. She didn't cry in front of the manager. She didn't beg. She just thanked her for her honesty and left. But now, alone in the kitchen, with the notebook full of impossible numbers in front of her, Grace felt the desperation rising in her throat like bile. How was she going to pay for everything with less money? How was she going to feed the girls? How was she going to keep a roof over their heads? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away the panic. She couldn't fall apart, not now. The girls needed her to be strong. Grace picked up the pen and started recalculating, trying to find a solution. Maybe she could postpone the rent for another week. Maybe the electricity bill could wait a little longer. Maybe she could get an extra shift somewhere. Maybe. But deep down, she knew she was just delaying the inevitable. Later that morning, Grace woke the girls for breakfast. Sophie and Maddie came into the kitchen in their pajamas, rubbing their eyes and yawning. "Good morning, Mummy," Sophie said, still sleepy. "Good morning, my love." Grace kissed the top of her head and served some milk with cereal. It wasn't much, but it was what she had. The girls sat down and began to eat in silence. Grace stood by the sink, drinking her cold coffee and watching her daughters. They seemed happy, still living in the enchantment of Christmas, still not completely understanding the weight Grace carried alone. Maddie looked up and smiled. "Mommy, the turkey yesterday was so good. It was the best Christmas of my life," Sophie finished, swinging her legs under the chair. Grace smiled, even as she felt her heart ache. "I'm glad you liked it, girls." Sophie stopped eating for a second and looked closely at her mother. She was small, but she had that kind of perception some children have, that way of sensing when something wasn't right. "Mommy, are you okay?" Grace blinked, surprised. "Of course, darling." "Why do you ask?" "You look tired." Grace forced a bigger smile, trying to hide what she really felt. "It's just because I woke up early, love. Everything's fine." Sophie continued to look at her for a few more seconds, but didn't insist. She went back to eating her cereal in silence. Grace breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't want the girls to worry. They already had so little in life. At least they deserved to have peace. After breakfast, Grace dressed the girls in warm clothes and took them to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Margie, who looked after them during the day while Grace worked. Mrs. Margie was a 70-year-old widow who loved children and charged very little for the favor. "Good morning, Grace," Mrs. Margie opened the door with a warm smile. "Good morning, girls." "Good morning, Mrs. Margie." Sophie and Maddie ran inside, already used to the routine. Grace handed over a small bag with snacks for the girls and quickly chatted with Mrs. Margie at the door. "Thank you again for watching them." "Oh dear, you don't need to thank me. They are darlings." Mrs. Margie lowered her voice and gently touched Grace's arm. "Are you all right? You look tired." Grace nodded too quickly. "I am. Just a little tired, really. Nothing major." Mrs. Margie didn't look convinced, but she didn't insist. "If you need anything at all, just tell me, okay?" "Thank you, Mrs. Margie." Grace left and walked to the bus stop, feeling the cold cut her face. She boarded the crowded bus and stood, holding the support bar as the vehicle rattled through the streets of Pine Hill. At work, she put on her maid uniform and started cleaning the rooms, one by one, changing sheets, cleaning bathrooms, vacuuming carpets. Her body ached, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. During her lunch break, Grace sat alone in the locker room and ate a simple sandwich she had brought from home. As she chewed, she looked at her old cell phone and thought about calling the girls, but she knew they were fine with Mrs. Margie. She just wanted to hear their voices, just to remember why she was doing all of this. Grace returned home in the late afternoon, exhausted. She picked up the girls at Mrs. Margie's house and walked back home with them. The refrigerator was almost empty when she opened the door. There was a little rice left, 2 eggs, and half a glass of milk. Grace looked at it and felt her stomach churn. She had to go shopping again, but with what money? She quickly closed the refrigerator before the girls saw. "Girls, go play in your room while Mommy prepares dinner, okay?" "Okay, Mommy." Maddie ran to the room, pulling Sophie by the hand. Grace returned to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator again, staring at the emptiness. She did the math in her head. She still had $10 saved in the glass jar on top of the refrigerator. It was enough to buy the basics tomorrow. It was enough to survive a few more days. She prepared a simple dinner, rice with scrambled eggs. The girls ate without complaining, chatting about what they had done at Mrs. Margie's house. After dinner, Grace bathed them, brushed their blonde hair, and put them to sleep. She read a short story, kissed their foreheads, and turned off the light. "Good night, Mommy," Sophie whispered. "Good night, my love." Grace went back to the living room and sat on the old couch, staring at the ceiling. The tiredness was so great that it hurt even in her bones. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come anymore. She was too tired even for that. She looked at the open notebook on the table, full of red numbers. She looked at the almost empty refrigerator. She looked at the bills piled up in the corner, and even so she forced a smile. Because that's what she did every day, smile, keep going, fight. For the girls. Always for the girls. The weekend arrived, bringing a little relief to Grace. At least she didn't have to work on Saturday, and that meant spending the whole day with the girls. She woke up later than usual and prepared a simple breakfast. After they ate, Sophie stood looking out the window, watching other children playing in the snow outside. "Mommy, can we go out?" Grace looked at her daughters. They had spent the whole week locked up at home or at Mrs. Margie's house. They deserved a little fun. "Of course, let's take a walk in the square." The girls cheered, jumping for joy. Grace dressed them in the warmest clothes they had, and they went out together. Pine Hill's main square was still decorated with Christmas lights. Even after the holidays, the city kept the decorations up for a few more weeks. It was a town tradition. Entire families walked around there, admiring the giant tree in the center of the square, all lit up with thousands of colorful lights. Grace held the twins' hands as they walked slowly. Sophie and Maddie looked at everything with enchantment, pointing to the glittering ornaments hanging from the posts and trees. "Look, Mommy, that star is huge." Maddie pointed to the top of the giant tree. "It really is beautiful," Grace agreed, smiling. There were stalls selling hot chocolate, roasted chestnuts, and sweets. The smell was delicious, but Grace looked away. She didn't have money to spend on those things. Just walking and looking was enough. The girls ran ahead a little, laughing and trying to catch snowflakes with their hands. Grace followed them closely, observing their every move. For a moment, she managed to forget her worries. For a moment, she was just a happy mother watching her daughters have fun. Then Sophie stopped suddenly. She stood motionless in the middle of the path, looking at a spot ahead. Her blue eyes widened, and she turned to Grace with excitement. "Mommy, it's the boy!" Grace frowned, confused. "Oh, asking what boy?" "The boy from the store." Sophie pointed discreetly to the other side of the square. Grace followed her daughter's gaze and saw it was him, the boy with messy brown hair, and next to him, the tall man in the dark coat, Aaron. Grace's heart gave a strange jump. She hadn't expected to see them again. She thought that encounter at the grocery store had been a unique moment, a gesture of kindness that would only remain in her memory. But there they were. Maddie also noticed and started waving with both hands, jumping up and down. "It's him! It's him!" Caleb was next to his father, drinking hot chocolate. When he saw the twins waving, his entire face lit up. He tugged hard on Aaron's coat sleeve. "Dad, look, it's the girls." Aaron looked up and saw Grace standing there, with her daughters beside her. He smiled, and it was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Caleb didn't wait another second. He dropped the cup of hot chocolate into his father's hand and ran toward the twins with a shy joy stamped on his face. "Hi," he stopped in front of them, a little awkward but smiling wide. "Hi." Sophie and Maddie replied at the same time, their cheeks flushed with excitement. "Did you come to see the lights too?" Caleb asked. "Yes, everything is so beautiful." Maddie spun around, opening her arms as if she wanted to hug the whole square. The three children started talking as if they were long-lost friends. Grace watched, surprised by how easily they bonded. It was instantaneous, natural, as if they had known each other for years. Aaron approached slowly, holding the cup of hot chocolate that Caleb had dropped. He stopped next to Grace, keeping a respectful distance. "Hi." "Hi," Grace replied, feeling her cheeks warm up a little. She didn't know why. "They seem to be getting along well," Aaron commented, looking at the children who were now laughing together. "They really do." Grace smiled, relaxing a little. "I didn't expect to run into you again." "Me neither." Aaron gave a slight smile. "But Pine Hill is a small town." "I guess it was only a matter of time." Grace laughed softly. "That's true." They were silent for a few seconds, just watching the children. Then Grace turned to Aaron with a serious and emotional expression. I wanted to thank you again for the turkey. You have no idea how much that meant to us." Aaron shook his head, minimizing it with humility. "You don't need to thank me. It was the least we could do. No one should spend Christmas without a dinner." "Even so," Grace looked down, trying to find the right words. "It was the best Christmas my daughters have ever had, and it was because of you." Aaron was silent for a moment, clearly touched by her words. "I'm happy to hear that," he said, his voice low and sincere. "My son hasn't stopped talking about you. I think he was very happy to be able to help." Grace looked at Caleb, who was now showing something in his hand to Sophie and Maddie. The three were completely absorbed in their conversation. "He seems like a very special boy." "He is." Aaron smiled proudly. Sometimes he teaches me more about kindness than I teach him." Grace felt a connection there, something light but real. This man wasn't arrogant. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just genuine. "Do you live here in Pine Hill?" Aaron asked, trying to get to know her better without being intrusive. "Yes, we've lived here for a few years. And you?" "Me too." "Actually, I grew up here. I left for a while, but I came back about 2 years ago." Grace nodded, absorbing the information. There were so many questions she wanted to ask, but she didn't want to seem nosy. The children started running in circles around the giant tree, laughing loudly. Caleb was in the lead, and Sophie and Maddie ran after him, trying to catch him. It was a simple scene, but full of pure joy. "They became friends quickly," Grace commented, smiling. "Children have that ease." Aaron crossed his arms, watching his son fondly. "They don't worry about the things adults worry about." "True." They stood there side by side in a comfortable silence. There was no rush. There was no pressure. Just two adults watching their children play under the bright lights of the square. After a few minutes, Aaron looked at Grace. "Do you have plans for the rest of the afternoon?" Grace shook her head. "No. We just came for a walk, really." "How about letting the kids play a little longer? There's a playground area near the fountain." Grace hesitated for a second. She didn't want to seem dependent. She didn't want Aaron to think she was trying to take advantage of his kindness. But then she saw how happy the girls were. She saw the wide smiles on their faces, and she decided that, just for today, she would let it happen. "All right." "They'll love it." Aaron called Caleb, and the 3 adults and 3 children walked together to the playground area. The children ran ahead, talking non-stop. Grace and Aaron walked side by side, exchanging quick glances and discreet smiles. It was the beginning of something. Grace didn't know what. She didn't know how far it would go. But for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe she wasn't completely alone. When they got close to the fountain, the children were already climbing the wooden structures, laughing and shouting with joy. Grace and Aaron sat on a nearby bench, watching. "Thank you for this," Grace said, looking at him. "For what?" "For letting your son play with my daughters. For being kind. For everything." Aaron turned to her, and his eyes were sincere. "You don't need to thank me for basic kindness, Grace." It was the first time he had said her name, and it did something strange in Grace's chest. something good. They continued sitting there, talking little but feeling a lot. The first connection between them was there. Light. Sincere and growing. In the following days, Sophie and Maddie couldn't stop talking about Caleb. "Mommy, Caleb is so cool," Sophie said while having breakfast on Monday morning. "He knew how to do a trick with his hands. Look, it was like this." Maddie tried to imitate some complicated movement with her fingers and ended up laughing at her own frustrated attempt. Grace smiled as she listened to her daughters chatter non-stop. It was good to see them excited. It was good to see them talking about a real friend. They didn't have many friends. The life they lived didn't allow it, but now they seemed to have found someone special. "Do you think we'll see him again?" Maddie asked, her eyes full of hope. "I don't know, dear. Pine Hill is small, so maybe we will." "I hope so," Sophie murmured, stirring her cereal with her spoon. Grace hoped so too, but she didn't say it out loud. On Wednesday afternoon, Grace had an unexpected break from work. One of the other housekeepers agreed to cover her shift, so Grace decided to take advantage and take the girls for a walk around town. They walked through the streets still decorated, looking at the shop windows and admiring the last remnants of the holiday season. Snow continued to fall lightly, covering everything with a fresh white layer. They were passing in front of a toy store when Maddie suddenly stopped. "Mommy, look!" Grace followed her daughter's gaze and felt her heart jump. Across the street, Aaron and Caleb were leaving a bakery. Caleb held a paper bag and was laughing at something his father had said. Sophie also saw them and started waving with both hands. "Caleb! Caleb!" The boy looked up, and when he saw the twins, his entire face lit up. He tugged on Aaron's sleeve and pointed in their direction. Aaron looked up and saw Grace. He smiled, and Grace felt her cheeks warm slightly. They crossed the street and came toward them. "Hi!" Caleb greeted the twins with excitement. "Hi, Caleb," the two replied together, jumping for joy. "Hello again," Aaron said, stopping next to Grace. There was something about the way he smiled that made Grace feel seen, not judged, just seen. "Say hi," Grace replied, trying to sound natural. "It seems like we can't stop bumping into each other. It seems so." Aaron laughed softly. "I guess Pine Hill is smaller than I thought." The children were already chatting animatedly, completely ignoring the adults. Caleb showed them the paper bag. "My dad bought sweet rolls. Want to try some?" "Can we?" Sophie looked at Grace, asking for permission. Grace hesitated, but Aaron was already opening the bag. "Of course, there's plenty here." He took out 2 sweet rolls and handed them to the twins, who thanked him with huge smiles. Grace wanted to refuse, but she couldn't. The girls were already biting into the rolls with joy. "Say up, thank you," Grace said softly. "You're welcome." Aaron shrugged what as if it were no big deal. The children started playing in the snow right there, running back and forth, throwing snowballs and laughing loudly. Grace and Aaron watched, exchanging a few words here and there. After a few minutes, Caleb stopped playing and approached the twins with an excited expression. "How do you want to play with me at the park tomorrow?" Sophie and Maddie looked at each other, their eyes sparkling with excitement. "Really?" Maddie shouted. "Really?" Caleb confirmed, nodding. "There's a huge park near my house. We can make a snowman and everything." The twins turned to Grace at the same time, with the faces of children who were about to burst with happiness. "Mommy, can we? Please, please, please." Grace looked at Aaron, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to assume anything. She didn't want Aaron to feel obligated to include them in his and his son's plans. But Aaron just smiled, calm. "If you think it's a good idea, I can take everyone there. The park is really great. Caleb loves it." Grace hesitated. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, but another part was afraid. Afraid of getting closer, afraid of creating expectations, afraid that all of this was temporary. But then she looked at her daughters, at their hopeful little faces, at the smiles that didn't appear often, and she made the decision, "All right, we'd love to go." The twins exploded in celebration, jumping and shouting as if they had just won the biggest gift in the world. Caleb jumped along with them, laughing loudly. It was such a pure scene that Grace felt her eyes water. Aaron smiled at her, a calm and genuine smile. Great, I can pick you up tomorrow morning. How about 10 o'clock? Perfect. Grace gave Aaron her address, which he noted on his phone. He didn't make any judgmental face when he heard the simple neighborhood she lived in. He just noted it down and confirmed the time. They said goodbye, and Grace returned home with the girls, who wouldn't stop talking about the next day's outing. That night, Grace could barely sleep. She didn't know why. Maybe it was nervousness. Maybe it was excitement. Maybe it was just the strange feeling that something in her life was starting to change. The next morning, Grace woke up early and carefully got the girls ready. She chose the warmest clothes they had, made sure they had gloves and hats, and waited. At 10 o'clock sharp, a car stopped in front of the house. It was a nice car, but not overly luxurious. Aaron got out and waved. "Good morning." "Good morning." Grace came out with the girls, who were already running toward the car. Caleb was in the back seat, waving through the window. The twins excitedly got in, and Grace sat in the front seat, next to Aaron. "Thank you for this," she said as he started the car. "You don't need to thank me. It'll be fun." The drive to the park was short. Aaron drove calmly, and the children talked non-stop in the back seat. Grace looked out the window, feeling a mixture of nervousness and comfort. When they arrived, Grace saw that Aaron hadn't exaggerated. The park was huge. There were snow-covered trees, gentle hills, open areas perfect for playing, and even a small frozen lake in the distance. "Wow," Sophie whispered, her eyes wide. "It's so big," Maddie finished. Caleb ran out of the car. "Let's go. Let's make snowmen." The three children dashed through the snow, laughing and shouting. Grace stood still for a second, just watching. It had been so long since she had seen her daughters like this, so free, so happy. Aaron came to stand beside her. "They'll get tired soon," he joked. Grace laughed. "I don't think so. They have endless energy." They walked slowly behind the children, watching as Caleb taught the twins how to roll large snowballs to make the snowman's body. "Look, you have to pack the snow really tight like this," Caleb demonstrated, shaping the snow with his small hands. Sophie and Maddie tried to imitate him, laughing when the snowballs crumbled in their hands, but little by little they managed. Together, the three built a crooked snowman, with branches for arms and stones for eyes. "It's perfect," Caleb declared, proud. "It's the coolest snowman in the world," Maddie agreed. After the snowmen, the children threw themselves into the snow to make snow angels. They moved their arms and legs, creating shapes in the soft snow. Then they stood up to admire the result, laughing at the imperfect figures. "Let's have a race," Caleb suggested, pointing to a gentle hill. "Let's." Sophie and Maddie accepted immediately. The three ran through the snow, slipping, falling, getting up and running again. Grace watched everything with a permanent smile on her face. It had been so long since she had seen her daughters laugh like this. Really laugh, without worries, without hidden sadness. Aaron sat down on a nearby wooden bench and waved to Grace. "Come sit for a while." Grace hesitated but accepted. She sat beside him, maintaining a respectful but comfortable distance. They stayed there, watching the children in silence for a few minutes. Then Aaron broke the silence. "Your daughters are amazing," Grace smiled, feeling her chest warm. "Thank you, they are everything to me." "I can see that. The way you look at them, it's beautiful." Grace was speechless for a second. No one had ever said anything like that to her. "And Caleb is special too," she said, shifting the focus. "He has a huge heart." "He does." Aaron smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "So sometimes I wonder if I do enough for him." "I'm sure you do." Aaron was silent, watching his son, who was now pretending to be a snow monster, while the twins ran away from him, giggling. "I try," Aaron said softly. "But it's hard to do everything alone sometimes." Grace understood perfectly what he meant. She lived it every day. "I know how that is." Aaron looked at her, and there was a mutual understanding there. They didn't need to explain. They simply knew. "Do you work?" Aaron asked, trying to get to know her better without being invasive. "Yes, I'm a housekeeper at a hotel." "That must be tough." "It is." Grace gave a tired smile. But it's what I can do while taking care of the girls. Aaron nodded respectfully. And you? Grace asked, curious. I work in business administration. Nothing too exciting. He laughed. But it allows me to have time with Caleb. So that's good. They continued talking, sharing small pieces of their lives. Nothing too deep. Nothing too personal yet. Just small windows opened into who they were. Grace discovered that Aaron liked strong coffee, that Caleb was a fan of dinosaurs, and that he had moved back to Pine Hill 2 years ago after living in another city. Aaron discovered that Grace loved to read when she had time, that the twins were born premature but were fighters from the start, and that she dreamed of going back to school one day. Time passed without them realizing it. The children continued to play, now inventing imaginary stories where they were explorers in the snow. Grace glanced at Aaron and noticed that he was also watching her. Their eyes met, and for a second neither of them looked away. There was something there, something light, something unhurried. But there was. "Thank you for today," Grace said softly. "The girls will remember this day forever. Caleb will too." Aaron smiled. "He already asked if he can do this again next week." Grace laughed. "That would be great." "Then it's a plan." The children finally started to get tired. They came running to the bench, their cheeks red with cold and their smiles wide. "It was the best day of my life," Sophie declared, hugging Grace. "Mine too." Maddie threw herself into her mother's lap. Caleb smiled, satisfied. "We have a lot of fun together." Aaron stood up and offered his hand to help Grace up. She accepted, feeling his hand warm and firm. They returned to the car, and Aaron drove Grace and the girls back home. During the ride, the children talked excitedly about everything they had done. When they arrived in front of the house, Grace got out with the girls and turned to Aaron. "Thank you, really. It was a pleasure." The children said goodbye with waves and promises to see each other soon. Aaron waited until Grace and the girls went inside before driving away. Grace closed the door and leaned against it for a second, taking a deep breath. Something was changing, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare her. The following Sunday was another day at the park. It had already become routine. Aaron would pick up Grace and the girls, and they would spend the whole afternoon playing in the snow while chatting and laughing together. This time, the children decided to build a snow house. Caleb had the idea in his head since the previous week, and finally managed to convince the twins to help him. "It's going to be the best little house in the world," Caleb declared, already starting to pile snow with his small hands. "It has to be really big," Sophie added, shaping snow blocks with dedication. "And it's going to have a real door," Maddie finished, jumping excitedly around the structure that was beginning to take shape. Grace and Aaron watched from a distance, sitting on their usual bench. There was something extremely comfortable about it. They didn't need to fill the silence with words all the time. They were just there, together, watching their children create memories they would keep forever. The children worked hard for almost an hour. The little house was small, crooked, and full of uneven holes, but to them, it was a true masterpiece. They managed to make low walls of packed snow, and even an opening that pretended to be an entrance door. Done. "Now let's play like we live here." Caleb went in first, crouching inside the fragile structure. Sophie and Maddie went in right behind him, laughing as they tried to fit into the cramped space. The three stayed inside, talking and laughing about their imaginary lives inside that snow house. Then, without realizing the weight of her words, Maddie naturally blurted out, "Today we only had bread at home." Sophie, completely innocent, finished without thinking, "Yeah, the food is running out again, but Mommy will figure it out. She always does." Maddie agreed, nodding with childlike confidence. "Yes, Mommy is really good at figuring things out." Caleb fell completely silent, carefully processing what he had just heard. He looked at Sophie, then at Maddie, with a deeply worried expression on his small face. You don't have food at home?" Sophie shrugged, as if it were something completely normal in their lives. "Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But Mommy always buys more when she has money." Maddie agreed, not understanding why Caleb seemed so worried. "It's normal," Mommy says we just have to wait a little while. Caleb didn't say anything else. He just stood there, quiet, with that information weighing heavily on his chest. He didn't completely understand what it was like to go hungry, but he understood that it was bad, very bad, and he felt a strange pain just thinking about his friends going through that. After a few minutes of uneasy silence, he left the snow house and ran to Aaron with hurried steps in the soft snow. "Dad?" Aaron was talking softly with Grace about something trivial when Caleb came running up. He stopped talking immediately and looked at his son, noticing the urgency on his face. "What is it, Caleb?" Caleb took a deep breath, his eyes shining with genuine concern. "Dad, their food is running out." Aaron frowned, confused and surprised. "What?" "The girls. They said today they only had bread at home, and that the food is running out again." Caleb looked back at the snow house where Sophie and Maddie were still playing carefree. "Can we help them, Dad? Please?" Aaron felt something violently tighten in his chest, a mixture of sadness, compassion, and admiration for his son's pure concern. He discreetly looked at Grace, who was looking at her daughters with a tired smile on her face, and hadn't heard absolutely anything of the conversation. She looked exhausted. She always looked exhausted. But she tried to hide it behind the gentle smiles and the strength she showed for her daughters. Aaron bent down to be exactly at his son's height and held his shoulders with affection and seriousness. "Thank you for telling me, son. We'll think of something, okay? We'll help." Caleb nodded immediately, visibly relieved to have shared that with his father. Grace turned at that moment and saw the two talking with serious expressions. She frowned, curious and slightly worried. "Is everything all right?" Aaron stood up too quickly, smiling to cover up the conversation. "Everything." Caleb just wanted to know if he could play a little longer before we left. "Oh, sure." Grace smiled back, completely unsuspecting. Aaron went back to sitting on the bench, but now his head was completely far away from there. He was thinking intensely about how to help, without making Grace feel ashamed or humiliated, without making it seem like degrading charity, just helping as a friend. That night, Aaron couldn't stop thinking about the matter. After tucking Caleb into bed and reading him a story, he sat alone in the living room staring into space while processing everything. The image of Sophie and Maddie saying they only had bread at home hammered insistently in his head. Children so small, so full of life and joy, going through something like that. And Grace. Grace, who worked so hard, who fought every day non-stop, who tried to give the best to her daughters, but who was clearly at the absolute limit of her strength. Aaron made a firm decision. The next morning, he woke Caleb up earlier than usual. It was still dark outside. "We're going for a ride, son. I need your help with something important." Caleb, still sleepy but excited, agreed immediately. They had a quick breakfast and left as soon as the sun began to appear on the horizon. Aaron drove to the grocery store and parked near the entrance. "We're going to buy some things for the girls and for Grace," Aaron explained as he grabbed a shopping cart. Caleb smiled wide, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Really? They'll be so happy." Aaron nodded and started walking through the aisles with determined steps. He didn't want to overdo it at all. He didn't want to buy luxurious or extravagant things that would make Grace feel bad or inferior. Just the basics, enough to genuinely help. Fruits, red apples, yellow bananas, juicy oranges, eggs, 2 large cartons, bread, 2 fresh loaves that were still warm, milk, 2 large cartons, pasta, a few packages of different types of noodles, rice, black and pinto beans, a little frozen chicken, butter, cheese, some yogurts, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed wealth, just simple, nutritious and essential food. Caleb helped put the things in the cart, completely excited about the mission. "They're going to like it a lot, right, Dad?" "I hope so, son." "I hope Grace doesn't get mad at us." "Why would she get mad? Sometimes people don't like to accept help. It makes them feel bad." Caleb was thoughtful for a moment. "But we're just being friends, right?" Aaron smiled, touched by his son's simplicity. "Exactly, Caleb. We're just being friends. Aaron paid for everything and carefully placed the bags in the trunk of the car. Then he drove to Grace's house, feeling the nervousness grow with every block. It was a simple neighborhood, with small houses and narrow streets full of snow. He parked right in front of her house and took a deep breath. Here we go. They grabbed the bags and went up the steps of the small wooden porch. Aaron knocked on the door 3 times. His heart was beating too fast. He didn't know exactly how Grace would react. He didn't know if he had done the right thing or if he was being too intrusive. The door opened slowly and Grace appeared. She was wearing a simple apron with flour on her hands and face, and she looked completely surprised. "Aaron? Caleb? What are you doing here so early?" Aaron took a deep breath and held up the full bags. "The girls mentioned yesterday that the food was running out. We thought this might help a little." He kept his voice extremely calm and respectful. "It's just friendship, no ulterior motives. We just want to help." Grace froze completely. She looked at the bags, then at Aaron, then at Caleb. Her eyes started to water quickly, and she covered her mouth with her flour-covered hand. I can't accept this." "Please," Aaron insisted, but not in a pushy way, just honest and gentle. "Let us help. It doesn't have to be difficult. We're friends." Grace shook her head, with tears starting to flow freely now. "You don't need to do this for me." "I know perfectly well we don't need to." Aaron took a careful step forward, extending the bags. "But we really want to, truly." At that exact moment, Sophie and Maddie appeared curiously behind Grace, still in their pajamas. When they saw Caleb standing there with his father, their faces completely lit up. "Caleb!" They ran to him, barefoot and happy, and Caleb smiled wide, excitedly showing them the heavy bags. "We brought food for you. There's a lot of good stuff." The twins looked amazed at the bags, then at their mother, their blue eyes shining with pure joy. "Mommy, look! There are fruits and milk." Grace couldn't hold back any more emotion. Tears flowed freely, but she smiled. It wasn't a smile of sadness or shame. It was a smile of deep relief, of true gratitude, of something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Real hope. "Thank you," she whispered with a broken voice, taking the heavy bags from Aaron's hands. Thank you very, very much. You have no idea what this means." Aaron smiled, visibly relieved by her reaction. "You're welcome. Seriously." The children immediately celebrated, jumping with absolute pure joy. Caleb went into the house with Sophie and Maddie, and the 3 began to take the things out of the bags carefully, chatting excitedly about each item. Grace and Aaron stood at the door, just looking at each other in deep silence. There was something completely different now, a solid trust, a real closeness that hadn't existed before that moment. "You really didn't have to," Grace started again, but Aaron shook his head firmly. "I know we didn't have to, but I wanted to. And Caleb really wanted to, too." Grace took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. "I don't know how I'm going to thank you for this." "You don't need to thank me for anything. Just accept it. It's okay to ask for help sometimes. Everyone needs it." Grace nodded slowly, and for the first time in years she felt that maybe it really was okay to accept help. After that special day, something profound changed between Grace and Aaron. They started seeing each other much more frequently. Sometimes it was at the grocery store, where they exchanged warm smiles and talked quickly about their days. Other times it was at the park, where the children played while they talked at length on the wooden bench. Sometimes it was simply in the square, where they walked side by side while the children ran excitedly ahead. The children became completely inseparable. Sophie, Maddie, and Caleb were like true siblings now. They laughed at the same silly jokes, played together every possible day, and invented elaborate stories together. And Grace began to genuinely trust Aaron. Truly. She clearly saw the way he treated his son with so much affection and patience. She saw his genuine kindness that expected absolutely nothing in return. Aaron showed genuine and deep interest in their lives. He asked about Grace's difficult job. He listened attentively when she talked about the girls and their personalities. He laughed sincerely at the funny stories. He became serious and concerned about the difficulties. Grace began to truly relax. She started allowing someone to really enter her life. She started feeling that she wasn't completely alone in this daily struggle. And Aaron felt exactly the same way. He deeply admired Grace's impressive strength, the determined way she fought every day without ever giving up, the way she loved her daughters above absolutely everything, her genuine humility, her unwavering dignity. The emotional chemistry between them grew constantly. It wasn't something explosive or hurried. It was gentle, natural, organic, like a beautiful song that starts softly and gradually increases until it fills the entire room. They exchanged glances that always lasted a second longer than they should, smiles that meant much more than simple words could express, completely accidental touches that made both of them stop for an instant, overly aware of the closeness. It was cinematic. It was real. It was scary and wonderful at the same time, and it was just beginning to blossom. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon, and the park was full of children enjoying the weak winter sun that was finally appearing between the clouds. Grace and Aaron sat on their usual bench, watching Sophie, Maddie, and Caleb play together near the snow-covered slide. The children laughed loudly, running back and forth, inventing elaborate games that only made sense to them. Caleb chased the twins, pretending to be a scary monster, and they shouted with genuine joy as they ran away from him. "Got you!" Caleb grabbed Maddie by the coat, and the two fell dramatically into the soft snow, laughing uncontrollably. Sophie threw herself on top of the two, and the three stayed there, completely tangled up, laughing until they could no longer breathe properly. Grace watched the scene with a permanent smile on her face. Seeing her daughters so happy was everything she ever wanted. Aaron also smiled, seeing his son have fun in a way that rarely happened before. After calming down, the children sat in a circle in the snow, talking about completely random things as children often do. Favorite cartoons, preferred colors, which ice cream flavor was the best in the world, whether dinosaurs were cooler than dragons. Then, in the middle of the relaxed conversation, completely out of the blue, Caleb said something with an absolutely unsettling childlike naturalness. "My mommy went to heaven when I was very little." Sophie and Maddie fell completely silent. They looked at Caleb with wide blue eyes, not knowing exactly what to say or how to react. Children rarely know how to deal when someone talks about death. Caleb continued, completely innocent, as if he were just sharing a normal fact of his life. "I don't remember her. Not one bit. Not her face. Not her voice. Nothing. Dad shows me pictures sometimes and says she was very nice and beautiful, but I really can't remember anything." He looked down, distractedly moving the snow with his small fingers. "Sometimes I wish I had a mum, like you guys have. It seems really nice to have a mum who takes care of us." His words floated in the cold air, heavy, honest, and painfully sincere. Sophie touched Caleb's arm with a gentleness that surprised even herself. "But you have your daddy, and he is very, very nice." "I know." Caleb smiled, but it was a small and sad smile. "He's the best dad in the whole world. He does everything for me. But sometimes I see other kids with their moms, playing, laughing, and I keep thinking what it would be like to have that too." Maddie hugged Caleb from the side, squeezing tightly as if she wanted to squeeze all the sadness out of him. "You can play with our mommy whenever you want. She's really nice too." Caleb smiled for real this time, and his eyes brightened a little. "Thank you. I really like your mommy." From the wooden bench, Grace had heard absolutely every word, every syllable, every emotionally charged pause. Her heart tightened violently, as if someone had plunged a cold hand into her chest and squeezed with all their might. She slowly turned to Aaron, who was sitting beside her. His eyes were completely fixed on his son, and his expression was deeply shaken. There was pain stamped there, old pain, pain that had never completely healed, pain that he carried every day in silence. Grace touched his arm with extreme delicacy. "Aaron, your wife?" He didn't answer immediately. He continued looking at Caleb, who was now laughing again with the twins, as if the sad moment had already completely passed for him. As children do, they feel deeply, but they move on. Then Aaron took a deep, shaky breath and finally spoke. his voice low and absolutely laden with years of repressed emotion. She died when Caleb was only 1 year old, car accident. It was fast. She didn't suffer, the doctors said, but that doesn't make it any easier. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. She put her hand over her mouth, trying to process that devastating information. "Aaron, I am so sorry." He slowly shook his head, still staring fixedly at his carefree playing son. It was a long time ago, 6 years. But some days it feels like it was yesterday. Some days I wake up and forget for a second that she's gone, and then I remember, and it hurts all over again. He paused, a long and painful pause, swallowing hard. Caleb has absolutely no memory of her. None, not a single memory. He grew up without knowing what it's like to have a real mother. Without knowing what it's like to be hugged by her when he wakes up scared at night. Without knowing what it's like to hear her voice saying everything will be okay. Aaron's voice began to visibly break. He pressed his lips tightly together, desperately trying to control himself and not fall apart there. I tried to be both father and mother at the same time. I tried to give him absolutely everything he needed. I learned to cook his favorite foods. I learned to do his hair when it got long. I learned to sew buttons and clean scraped knees. But there are things I simply cannot give him, you know. There's a huge void inside him that I don't know how to fill no matter how hard I try. Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes quickly. She held Aaron's hand, squeezing with all the strength she had. "You did an absolutely incredible job. Caleb is a wonderful, kind, good-hearted boy. That's all because of you. I know he's special." Aaron smiled weakly, his eyes shining wetly. "He is my whole world, but I always had this constant fear that he would never feel real maternal love. Fear that he would grow up with this huge hole inside him, and I couldn't do absolutely anything to help. Fear of failing him." He finally turned completely to Grace, his eyes red and shining with unshed tears. "I just want my son to know what it's like to be loved exactly as he deserves. I want him to have everything I couldn't give him. I want him to be complete. I want him to be truly happy, not just on the outside." Grace couldn't hold back any more emotion. Tears flowed freely down her face. She squeezed Aaron's hand even harder, feeling his deep pain as if it were completely her own, too. "He will be happy, Aaron. He already is happy. Anyone can see that. And it's because of you. Because of everything you've done and do every day." Aaron nodded slowly, but didn't say anything else. He stayed there, completely vulnerable, totally exposed, his heart open for the first time since Grace had met him. And in that exact moment, something extremely profound changed between them. Grace no longer saw just a kind and generous man who helped her and her daughters. She saw a completely lonely father, a man who had lost absolutely everything, and yet continued to fight bravely every day to give his son the best. She saw someone deeply human, vulnerable, real, imperfect, but trying. And that made the bonds between them deepen in a way she never expected or imagined possible. After that revealing day at the park, Grace and Aaron began to spend even more time together. It wasn't forced at all. There was no elaborate planning. It just happened naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Grace invited Aaron and Caleb to dinner at her house the following Friday. It was the first time he would actually enter her house, beyond the door, and Grace was extremely nervous about it. The house was so small, so simple, with old, worn furniture and peeling walls that she didn't have money to paint. But Aaron didn't seem to mind at all. When he arrived with Caleb at the agreed time, he carried a paper bag in his hand. "I brought some sweets. I made brownies this afternoon. I hope you like them." "We love brownies!" Maddie shouted excitedly, jumping for joy around him. The children immediately ran to the twins' tiny room to play with the few toys they had, and Grace stayed in the cramped kitchen preparing the simple dinner. Aaron offered to help without hesitation, and she accepted, grateful for the company. They worked side by side in that small kitchen, carefully cutting vegetables, stirring pots, seasoning the food, talking about seemingly simple but meaningful things. There was a genuine intimacy in it, a surprising naturalness that made Grace feel completely comfortable. "You cook very well," Aaron commented sincerely, tasting the tomato sauce. I learned out of pure necessity, Grace laughed, stirring the pot. You can't eat out when you can barely pay the basic bills at the end of the month. Aaron became serious for a moment, thoughtful. I know exactly what that's like. After my wife died, I had to learn absolutely everything from scratch alone. Cooking, doing laundry, ironing, combing a small child's hair. He laughed, but it was a laugh loaded with sadness. I was completely terrible at first. I burned more food than I can count. And now? Now I'm just less terrible, Grace laughed genuinely, and Aaron smiled wide at hearing that beautiful sound. Dinner was ready quickly, and they affectionately called the children. They all sat together at the small old table, cramped but incredibly happy. The children talked animatedly, non-stop, laughing loudly and telling completely crazy stories they invented. Grace looked around the table and felt something extremely strange, but wonderful in her chest. This felt like a real family. Aaron also felt exactly that. He looked at Caleb laughing carelessly with the twins, saw Grace smiling gently as she served more food for everyone, and felt a deep sensation that he hadn't felt in long years, genuine belonging. After the plentiful dinner, the children ran back to the room, and Grace and Aaron remained comfortably in the living room, sitting side by side on the old sunken couch. They talked in low voices, sharing deep stories of their difficult lives. Grace finally told him about the girl's father, how he cowardly abandoned them before they were even born, how she had to raise the two completely alone from day one, how it was absurdly difficult, but she never regretted it for a second. Aaron told her more details about his wife, how they met when they were young in college, how they were extremely happy for a time that was too short, how everything brutally fell apart in a single night when she simply didn't come home. There was immense pain in both their stories, but there was also an impressive strength. "You are absolutely incredible, you know," Aaron suddenly said, looking intently at Grace. She was genuinely surprised. Why? For absolutely everything. For fighting bravely every day without giving up. For not throwing in the towel even when everything seems impossible. For raising two beautiful and incredibly happy girls, even going through all this alone. Grace felt her cheeks visibly warm. "You are also incredible. Caleb is very lucky to have you as a father." Aaron smiled, but his eyes remained completely serious. "Sometimes I really don't feel sufficient for him. No one ever feels completely sufficient." Grace touched his hand delicately. "But we try with everything we have, and in the end, that's what truly matters." They looked deeply into each other's eyes. The silence was absolutely charged with something heavy and significant, something extremely real. Aaron didn't look away for a second. Neither did Grace. There was something powerful there, something constantly growing, something both scary and absolutely wonderful. In the following weeks, the meetings continued to happen naturally. Grace invited Aaron and Caleb more and more often. They ate dinner together regularly, watched simple movies on the S'mores old television, and talked late into the night while the children slept peacefully. Aaron also invited Grace and the girls to his house several times. It was a considerably larger, more spacious and comfortable house, but Grace never felt uncomfortable or inferior there. Aaron always made absolutely sure that she felt completely at home. The emotional intimacy between them grew visibly with each passing day. Conversations at the table became increasingly deep and meaningful. Laughter became more frequent and genuine. Constant exchanges of stories revealed hidden parts of themselves that absolutely no one else knew. And the glances. The glances became progressively longer, more intense, heavily laden with something neither of them yet had the real courage to name out loud. The children already behaved exactly like real siblings. Sophie, Maddie, and Caleb were completely inseparable now. They had sleepovers, shared all their toys, occasionally fought over insignificant silly things, and quickly reconciled within minutes. One day, while playing excitedly at the park as always, Maddie said something innocent that made Grace and Aaron stop completely. "Caleb, you're like my real brother now." Caleb smiled incredibly wide. "You guys are my sisters too." "My favorite sisters." Sophie hugged the two tightly. "We're like a family now." Grace and Aaron exchanged profoundly meaningful glances. Those seemingly innocent words carried an absolutely huge emotional weight. A family. Could it really be like that? Grace had a genuine fear of seriously thinking about it. Fear of allowing herself to dream of something like that. Fear of being brutally hurt. Fear of hurting the girls if everything fell apart. Aaron also carried intense fears. Fear of not being truly sufficient. Fear of completely ruining everything. Fear that Grace would eventually realize he was just a broken man desperately trying to put the pieces back together. But even carrying all these paralyzing fears, they continued. They continued meeting regularly. They continued talking deeply. They continued getting closer and closer, because, deep down in their absolute hearts, they both knew perfectly well that something genuinely special was happening between them. Something that was definitely worth all the risk involved. Something that could potentially change everything in their lives. And even carrying so much fear, they were genuinely willing to discover exactly where all this would lead, together. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The snow fell softly outside, covering Pine Hill with a white, silent blanket that muffled all the sounds of the city. Inside Grace's house, the atmosphere was warm and deeply welcoming. The children were sitting comfortably on the living room floor, completely focused on their colorful drawings. Sophie was carefully coloring a colorful house with a huge yellow sun in the sky. Maddie was drawing delicate purple flowers and butterflies with glittery wings. Caleb was making what looked like a giant dinosaur attacking a city full of buildings. Grace and Aaron were sitting side by side on the old couch, watching the children with calm, tender smiles. There was something deeply comforting about that simple moment. Nothing extravagant, nothing planned, just absolute peace. Aaron broke the silence in a low and soft voice. "They get along so well. It's truly impressive to see that." "It is," Grace agreed, looking affectionately at her daughters. "I've never seen the girls so happy, so complete." An extremely comfortable silence settled between them. But there was something different in the air. Something heavy but necessary, something that finally needed to be said out loud. Grace took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice hesitant and laden with old emotion. "I never properly told you about their father, did I?" Aaron turned completely to her, giving her his full attention. "Only what you wanted to share with me. I never wanted to pressure you." Grace looked at her own hands, gathering all the courage she could find within herself. "I met him when I was very young. I had just turned 18. I thought I was really in love. I thought he was different from everyone else." She gave a bitter and painful smile. "When I found out I was pregnant with twins, I was completely terrified, but also strangely happy. I thought we would build a beautiful family together." Aaron listened in absolute silence, without interrupting for a second. "But when I finally told him about the pregnancy, I saw pure panic on his face. I saw the fear. I saw the instant rejection. He said he wasn't ready, that he was too young to be a father, that he had plans for his life." Grace shook her head, her eyes starting to water. 2 weeks later, he simply vanished from the map. He moved out of town without telling anyone, blocked my number, blocked my social media, completely disappeared from my life. He never came back. He never wanted to know about the girls. Never asked if they were okay, if they were alive, nothing. "Grace," Aaron touched her arm with extreme gentleness. "I raised them completely alone from day one. In the hospital, when they were born premature and small, I held the two in my arms and thought desperately, how am I going to do this alone? How am I going to cope?" The tears began to fall freely now. There were horrible days when I wanted to give up everything. Days when I didn't know if I really could. But then I looked at those little faces and knew I had no choice. They desperately needed me, and I needed them too. Aaron held her hand with firmness and affection, "And you did an absolutely incredible job. You are the strongest and bravest woman I know." Grace wiped her tears with the back of her hand and smiled weakly. "Sometimes I don't feel strong at all. Sometimes I feel completely lost and aimless. We all feel that way at some point." Aaron took a deep breath, preparing himself. "After my wife died in that accident, I fell into a deep black hole. So I had absolutely no idea how to move forward, how to take care of a small baby alone, how to be a father and mother at the same time without failing." Grace squeezed his hand tightly, silently encouraging him to continue. The loneliness was completely suffocating. I would wake up in the middle of the night when Caleb was crying desperately, and for a second, I forgot that she wasn't there beside me anymore. I would turn to the empty side of the bed, naively hoping to see her. But there was only emptiness and silence. His voice visibly failed. I talked to her for months and months after she died. I talked to myself in the car, in the shower, in any quiet place. I asked for advice on how to raise our son. I asked for strength to continue. I asked her to come back in some impossible way. Tears flowed freely now on Aaron's face, and he made no effort to hide them. The loneliness never completely went away, you know. Even with Caleb growing up beside me, even keeping myself busy all the time, there was always this huge, painful void inside me, this constant feeling of being incomplete, of being profoundly alone, even when I was surrounded by people. Grace didn't say absolutely anything. She just held his hand even tighter, letting him know she was there. Her deep silence full of raw emotion arose between them. It wasn't uncomfortable at all. It was a silence that said absolutely everything that simple words couldn't express adequately. Then Aaron turned his body completely toward Grace, looking directly and deeply into her eyes. "You brought true light into our life." Grace felt her heart race violently in her chest. "Aaron, it's the absolute truth. Since that day at the grocery store, when I saw you and the girls trying to buy dinner with so little, something fundamentally changed inside me. Caleb completely changed. He started laughing more, waking up excited and eager. He talked about you absolutely all the time." Aaron smiled, his eyes shining intensely. "Sas and I completely changed too. For the first time in long years, I no longer felt alone. I no longer felt incomplete or broken. You and the girls filled huge spaces inside me that I didn't even know existed." Grace felt the tears return full force. But now they were completely different tears. "And you brought true peace into my life." It was Aaron's turn to be genuinely surprised. Grace continued, her voice deeply choked with emotion. "I spent entire years fighting completely alone, carrying everything on my back without help, without absolutely anyone to share the crushing weight. Without anyone to hold me when I was falling into the abyss." She touched his face with extreme delicacy. "But then you simply appeared in my life, and suddenly I wasn't alone in this battle anymore. Suddenly, there was someone who genuinely cared, someone who saw my daughters not as a burden or a problem, but as a true blessing. Someone who made me feel sufficient for the first time." Aaron held her face carefully with both hands. "You were always more than sufficient." They looked at each other deeply and intensely. Everything finally fit together. All the pieces of the puzzle, all the hidden fears, everything finally made perfect sense now. Aaron approached extremely slowly, giving Grace full time to back away if she wanted to, but she didn't back away an inch. She approached too, equally determined. And then they finally kissed. It was a soft but intense kiss, full of genuine promise, of renewed hope, of absolutely everything they had carefully kept inside for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and smiling at the same time. The children, completely oblivious to the profound moment happening, continued coloring concentratedly on the floor. But something had changed, definitively and permanently. Finally, absolutely everything had fallen perfectly into place. A whole year had passed. And what an impressive difference a year could make in someone's life. Grace woke up on the clear Christmas morning in an extremely comfortable bed, in a properly heated room, without those absolutely suffocating worries about how she would pay the overdue bills at the end of the month. She had finally gotten a considerably better job in a local office, with much more humane hours and a salary that really allowed her to breathe a sigh of relief. The girls had visibly grown. They were taller, more mature, and incredibly happy in a way Grace had never seen before. They laughed much more. They played with more energy. They dreamed bigger. Grace looked calmly out the window and saw the snow falling softly over all of Pine Hill. But this time, the snow didn't just seem cold and inconvenient. It seemed genuinely magical. Her cell phone vibrated softly on the bedside table. It was an affectionate message from Aaron. "Everything's ready here. What time are you arriving?" Grace smiled widely and quickly replied, "In about an hour. The girls are extremely anxious." She got out of bed and went to wake up Sophie and Maddie, who literally jumped out of bed immediately. "It's Christmas! It's Christmas!" Maddie shouted excitedly, running all over the house. "And we're going to spend the whole day with Caleb," Sophie finished, equally excited and jumping. Grace patiently helped them get dressed, choosing pretty dresses she had bought especially for the special occasion. The girls looked absolutely beautiful, with their blonde hair perfectly brushed and colored bows tied with care. They carefully picked up the gifts they had wrapped with so much affection for Aaron and Caleb and went out together. Aaron's house was only a comfortable 10-minute drive away. When they finally arrived, Caleb was already anxiously at the door, waving excitedly with both hands. "You're here! You're finally here!" The girls immediately ran to him, and the three hugged tightly as they always naturally did. Aaron appeared right behind his son, smiling extremely wide. He was wearing a bright red Christmas sweater and looked more relaxed and happy than Grace had ever seen him in all the time she had known him. "Merry Christmas," he said warmly, hugging Grace affectionately right at the entrance. "Merry Christmas." They entered the spacious house, which was absolutely and completely decorated. Colored lights twinkled cheerfully throughout the entire room. A huge tree full of glittering ornaments lit up the corner, and Christmas music was playing softly and pleasantly in the background. But what really instantly caught Grace's attention was the plentiful table. In the absolute center, perfectly roasted and golden, was a huge, succulent turkey. Grace felt her eyes fill with tears immediately and uncontrollably. Aaron noticed her reaction and smiled with extreme tenderness. "It's the powerful symbol of the beginning of absolutely everything, isn't it?" Grace nodded emotionally, completely unable to speak at that moment. The children ran excitedly to the table, completely amazed by everything. "Oh, look how many sweets there are." Maddie pointed excitedly at the table, literally full of delicious desserts. "And there are so many presents under the tree," Sophie shouted excitedly, running immediately to get a better look. Caleb quickly went after them, and the three began to play animatedly, laughing extremely loudly. Grace and Aaron watched affectionately, side by side. "They are so incredibly happy together," Grace murmured emotionally. "They really are. They look like real blood siblings." They spent the entire morning opening carefully wrapped presents, eating heartily, laughing non-stop, and creating precious memories. The children played absolutely non-stop, running through the entire house with completely endless energy. After the hearty lunch, when the sun finally began to set on the horizon, Aaron quietly called Grace aside. "Come with me. I want to show you something special." They calmly stepped out onto the spacious back porch. The snow was falling extremely softly, covering the entire garden with an absolutely perfect white carpet. The colorful lights of the house reflected beautifully on the snow, creating an almost completely magical atmosphere. Aaron held Grace's hand firmly and affectionately, and the two stood there in absolute silence, just observing the impressive beauty around them. Then Aaron turned completely to her, with an expression that was serious but absolutely full of love. "Grace, can I ask you one important thing?" "Of course you can." He took a deep, visibly nervous breath. "Can I be a permanent part of your family?" Grace felt her heart literally explode in her chest. The tears returned instantly, but they were tears of absolute and pure happiness. She smiled widely, squeezing his hand with all her strength. "You already are. You always have been since that day." Aaron smiled too, his eyes shining intensely with emotion. "I love you deeply. I love you and the girls with everything I have. You are my whole world now. I love you too very much. And Caleb is an essential part of us. He always has been from the start." They kissed there, on the silent porch, under the snow that was falling gently and delicately. Then they heard loud laughter coming from inside the house. The three children appeared running together, seeing the two embracing. "What are you doing out there in the cold?" Sophie asked curiously. "Just talking about important things," Grace replied, smiling tenderly. Caleb looked attentively at the two, then at the twins, and smiled extremely wide. "We're a real family now, aren't we?" Grace and Aaron looked deeply at each other and smiled together. Yes, Caleb. We are a completely real family. The three children immediately ran and hugged the two adults at the same time. It was a completely messy, tight hug, full of genuine laughter and pure love. Grace looked calmly around, at Aaron beside her, at the children in her arms, at the snow falling gently, at the lights shining warmly. And finally, after so much suffering, she felt absolutely complete. The snow continued to fall softly and silently over Pine Hill. The lights of the house shone extremely warmly in the dark night, and inside that cozy porch, a family, imperfect, patched together but absolutely real, hugged tightly. The smiles were completely sincere. The hearts were absolutely full. And the future, for the first time in years, seemed genuinely bright. It was a wonderful new beginning, a true new home, a complete new family, and absolutely everything had started with a simple act of pure kindness in a random grocery store on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year ago. Sometimes miracles really happen when we absolutely least expect them. And sometimes, all we really need is a special someone who sees our daily struggle and genuinely decides to stay. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.